It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon. Steven Seagal walked calmly through a busy public plaza near a courthouse downtown. No bodyguards, no cameras. Just a long black coat, sunglasses, and the slow, confident walk of a man who looked like he had nowhere urgent to be. People passed by without paying much attention. To most, he looked like just another older man enjoying the day. Then everything changed. 2 police officers suddenly stepped into his path. "Sir, stop right there." Steven paused. He slowly removed his sunglasses and looked at them, calm and unreadable. "Yes, officer." It wasn't routine. It was sharp, accusatory, like a decision had already been made. One officer looked him up and down and said, "We've had complaints. You're disturbing the area." Steven blinked once. Disturbing how? The officer ignored the question. "I need to see some identification." Steven didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look surprised. He simply reached into his coat and handed it over. The second officer glanced at the ID, smirked, and handed it back without really looking. Step to the side. That's when people around them started slowing down. Something felt off. Steven calmly replied, "Officer, I haven't done anything wrong." The first officer scoffed. "That's what they all say." Phones came out. A woman across the street started recording. A man whispered, "Why are they stopping him?" Steven took a breath. His voice stayed steady. "You're making a mistake." The officer laughed. "Oh yeah, you lawyers always say that." Before Steven could respond, the officer grabbed his arm. "Turn around." The sound of metal clicking echoed louder than it should have. "Handcuffs." A ripple went through the crowd. "Wait, why is he being arrested?" someone asked. "For resisting," the officer said loudly, though Steven hadn't resisted at all. Steven didn't fight back. He didn't protest. He simply looked around, at the phones recording, at the confused faces, at the officers who were already congratulating themselves. As they led him toward the patrol car, one officer leaned in and said quietly, almost mockingly, "You should have just cooperated." Steven glanced at him calm as ever, and replied in a low voice, "I am cooperating." Then, after a pause, he added something that made the officer frown. "Let's just see how this plays out." The car door slammed shut, and no one there had any idea that this simple arrest, one that looked routine, forgettable, and justified, was about to turn into something that would shock an entire courtroom the very next day. The patrol car didn't move right away. Steven Seagal sat quietly in the back seat, hands cuffed in front of him, posture relaxed as if this were nothing more than a delay in his day. Outside, the small crowd that had gathered continued to grow. People slowed their steps. Some stopped completely. Phones were now openly pointed at the officers. One man muttered, "He didn't even do anything." Another voice followed, louder this time. "Why are they treating him like that?" The first officer turned toward the crowd, irritation flashing across his face. "Keep moving, folks. This doesn't concern you." But it already did. The second officer leaned against the patrol car, arms crossed, wearing a satisfied smile. He glanced back at Steven through the window like a teacher who'd just disciplined a troublesome student. "Funny how calm you are," the officer said loudly, making sure the cameras could hear. "Most people get nervous when they're caught." Steven lifted his eyes slowly. "Caught doing what?" The officer laughed. "Still playing dumb." A woman recording from a few feet away shook her head. "This is messed up," she said under her breath. Steven said nothing. He didn't look angry. He didn't look scared. If anything, he looked patient, almost curious, like a man watching a story unfold that he already knew the ending to. That calm seemed to irritate the officer even more. "You think you're special," the officer continued. "Walking around like you own the place?" Steven answered evenly. "Number, I think everyone deserves to be treated fairly." That sentence landed heavier than it sounded. For a brief moment, the officer hesitated. Then he scoffed. "Save it for the judge." The crowd murmured again. Someone whispered, "Why is he being so respectful if he's guilty?" Another person said, "This feels wrong." More phones came out. A teenager zoomed in. A man across the street crossed his arms, staring hard at the officers. The situation was no longer private, no longer controlled, and everyone could feel it. The first officer raised his voice. clearly trying to reclaim authority. "All right, enough. We're done here." He turned toward the driver's seat, but before he could get in, Stephen spoke again. Not loud, not defiant. "Officer," he said, "may I ask one question?" The officer paused. "Hand on the door, make it quick. Am I being arrested for something I did, or for how I look?" The question hung in the air. Silence. The officer's jaw tightened. "You're being arrested for your behavior." Stephen nodded slowly. "Then I trust that we'll be clear on the report." That was it, no argument, no lecture, just a statement. The officer slammed the door harder than necessary and finally pulled away from the curb. As the car drove off, the crowd didn't disperse right away. People stood there, replaying what they'd just seen. "That guy handled that way better than I would have," someone said. "Yeah," another replied, almost like he knew something. Inside the moving car, the second officer glanced back again. "You're pretty calm for someone headed to a cell." Stephen looked out the window at the passing buildings. "Calm comes from knowing the truth," he replied. The officer rolled his eyes. "Sure." They arrived at the station. Stephen was escorted inside, past flickering fluorescent lights and bored expressions. No one rushed. No one seemed concerned. To them, this was just another name, another file, another routine arrest. Stephen was processed quickly, belongings logged. Questions asked, no lawyer requested, no phone call made. That surprised the desk officer. "You don't want to call anyone?" he asked. Stephen met his eyes. "Not yet." The officer shrugged. "Suit yourself." Wordlessly, Stephen was guided toward the holding area. As the gate closed behind him, the echo of metal on metal filled the hallway. Still, he didn't flinch. Back outside, clips of the arrest were already spreading. Social media comments poured in. "Why does this feel like abuse of power? That guy was way too calm. And you know who he is." And that question, who is he, started gaining traction. Before the night was over, thousands of people had seen the footage. Some were angry, some confused, some just curious. But one thing was clear to everyone watching. This wasn't over and. Whatever the officers thought they had accomplished that afternoon, they had unknowingly stepped into a situation far bigger than they imagined. Where are you watching this from? Which country or city? Drop it in the comments and let's see how far this story has reached. Because by the time morning came, this arrest wouldn't just belong to one street. It would belong to the entire internet. The holding cell was small, fluorescent, lit, and smelled faintly of disinfectant. Steven Seagal sat on the cold metal bench, his hands cuffed in front of him, but he didn't fidget. He didn't pace. He simply sat calm, almost meditative. Other detainees shuffled in and out. Some whispered nervously. Some stared. Stephen didn't acknowledge them. He didn't need to. His presence alone seemed to fill the room. "Hey, you're that actor guy, right?" a young man asked, nodding toward him. Stephen lifted his gaze slowly, meeting the man's eyes. "I am," he said quietly, in a tone that carried no arrogance, only composure. The young man blinked. "Wow. They arrested you." Stephen shrugged lightly. "They believe it's necessary." The detainee laughed nervously. "Man, you look way too calm for this. I'd be freaking out." Stephen's calmness wasn't just composure. It was confidence. Not confidence in his fame, but confidence in the truth. He had done nothing wrong. That simple fact gave him control that no handcuffs or flashing cameras could take away. Officers walked past, glancing at him with a mix of curiosity and irritation. "You sure you don't want to say anything?" one asked. Stephen looked up slowly, met the officer's eyes. "I'll say what needs to be said at the right time." The officer snorted and walked away, muttering under his breath. Time stretched. Minutes became hours. Stephen remained quiet, almost as if the cell itself was part of a test, and he intended to pass it with dignity intact. Other inmates watched him. A few tried to provoke reactions. Silly remarks, sarcastic jokes, subtle taunts. Stephen didn't respond. Not with words. Not with expressions. He simply observed, letting their own impatience and insecurity reveal their character. By mid-afternoon, The holding cell had filled. Guards kept checking IDs and taking notes. Every now and then, someone would mutter about the video circulating online. Stephen glanced up when he heard the murmurs. People were starting to recognize him more widely than he'd expected. "Seems like everyone knows who you are," one officer remarked as he passed. Stephen didn't reply. He only tilted his head slightly, as if acknowledging the truth without needing to comment. Then came the whispers. Some detainees recognized the viral clip. They talked quietly among themselves, excitement in their voices. "Dude, he didn't even argue," one said. "Yeah, and those cops look like idiots in the video," another replied. Stephen let them talk. Let the tension settle. His calm demeanor only made the officers more uneasy. By evening, the cell was almost empty. Only a few remained, and Stephen still sat in the same spot, unaffected by the constant shuffling and noise. It was in this quiet endurance that his strength became most obvious, not the strength of fists or fame or influence, but the strength of patience, clarity, and moral control. Across town, snippets of the arrest were shared, replayed, and commented on. Social media users debated whether the officers had acted appropriately. People were captivated by the contrast, the chaotic, aggressive actions of authority versus the silent, unshakable calm of a man who had done nothing wrong. And inside the cell, Stephen remained silent, observing, listening, waiting. Eventually, one of the guards leaned over, curiosity mixed with caution. "You're calm. Way too calm. Most people would be panicking, screaming, trying to explain themselves." Stephen's voice remained steady. "Calm comes from knowing the truth. Anxiety comes from fearing what is not certain." The guard frowned, unsure how to respond. The words lingered in the small room. As night fell, Stephen finally leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed. He could hear faint murmurs from the other detainees and occasional clicks from distant cameras outside. Every sound confirmed what he already knew. The world was watching, even if no one in the room realized the impact this arrest would have. If you were in Stephen's place, would you fight back, argue, or stay calm like him? Comment your choice below. Let's see how strong your mind is under pressure. By maintaining complete calm and refusing to react impulsively, Stephen had mentally trapped everyone around him. The officers, the bystanders, the detainees, and even the audience. Everyone wondered, what is he planning? Why isn't he panicking? This was the perfect psychological setup. By the time the next day's courtroom events unfolded, the tension had already reached its peak. Everyone was now waiting, unknowingly, for the reveal that would shock the entire room. The next morning, the courthouse was already bustling. Journalists lined the hallways with cameras slung over shoulders, microphones in hand. Lawyers scurried between offices, papers in stacks, hurriedly consulting with clients. A low hum of chatter filled the air, punctuated by the occasional slam of a courtroom door. Stephen Seagal walked in quietly, escorted by two officers. He wore the same long black coat, sunglasses tucked neatly, and an expression that was unreadable. Calm, almost casual. No fanfare, no entourage, just him. To anyone passing by, he could have been any other man entering for a mundane civil matter. The officers, however, believed they had the upper hand. They had already told themselves this was a routine hearing, a minor embarrassment for Seagal. Their confidence radiated outward, and it did not go unnoticed. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with anticipation. Reporters whispered in corners. Cameras zoomed in on the empty judge's bench, and the spectators shuffled, murmuring about the unusual arrest the day before. Everyone assumed they understood the story. An actor in handcuffs, apparently arrested for disturbing the peace. The scene was set, and everyone was waiting for a predictable outcome. Stephen entered the courtroom and paused at the back, letting the officers guide him to the assigned seat. He didn't fidget, he didn't speak. He simply observed. Every person in the room, the prosecutor, the clerks, the spectators, and even the security officers, felt an odd tension, like they were waiting for a storm that had not yet arrived. The prosecutor, a young woman in her mid-30s, glanced at the officers and whispered, "This should be quick. They'll plead guilty or settle." Her assumption was confident, bordering on smug. She didn't know that the calm man sitting quietly in the back had already anticipated every angle. Nearby, spectators murmured, "Is that really him?" "Yes, the video's online. He's calm, like nothing phases him. Why wasn't there a lawyer yesterday? Maybe he doesn't need one. Stephen remained silent, letting the room settle into its assumptions. It was easy to underestimate someone who didn't fight, someone who didn't react. That was the point. People judged him by appearances, by the arrest, by the silence, but they didn't yet know who they were dealing with. Minutes stretched. The clerk called the room to order, and the gallery quieted. A few more officers entered, some whispering to each other about how calm he is, as if that alone made them uneasy. Stephen's gaze scanned the room slowly, observing faces, noting expressions, reading body language with the precision of someone trained to understand subtle cues. Every smirk, every eye roll, every whispered comment was a piece of the puzzle. The audience, both in the room and online watching the viral clips, felt the tension too. They were trapped in the narrative without even realizing it. A man who refused to panic, refused to argue, refused to take the bait. The suspense was thick, almost palpable. Then came the final piece of anticipation. The judge. The courtroom clock ticked steadily as people waited for the doors to open. Everyone assumed the judge would be late, distracted, maybe dismissive. Officers whispered among themselves, certain that Seagal's calmness would crumble under pressure. Prosecutors nodded at each other, confident in the predictable outcome. Stephen leaned back slightly in his seat, arms folded. He didn't fidget. He didn't glance at his phone. Instead, he let the air of expectation build, letting the courtroom assume they understood the story. And in that silence, tension multiplied. Finally, the doors to the judge's chambers opened, and everyone looked up. A hush fell over the room. Stephen's eyes shifted subtly toward the entrance. Something in his posture changed, only slightly, but perceptibly. He straightened, shoulders squared, his calm confidence radiating more strongly now. The murmurs grew. Here comes the judge. Looks like it's going to be interesting. No way this ends quietly. Even the officers shifted uneasily. They had believed they were in control. They had believed this would be an ordinary, straightforward hearing. Now, just seeing the judge approach, paired with Seagal's unwavering composure, uncertainty crept into their minds, and as the judge's silhouette became visible in the doorway, the room collectively held its breath. Nothing yet had been revealed, but the emotional trap was set. Everyone's assumptions were about to be challenged, and the audience, the viewers online, the journalists, the spectators in the gallery, felt that unspoken tension. They were being mentally pulled forward, trapped in curiosity and suspense, waiting for the moment that would shock the entire courtroom. Stephen's calm, quiet presence had already shifted the power dynamics. Officers, spectators, and viewers alike were now emotionally invested. Everyone was thinking, what will happen next? And that question, the unspoken tension, the suspense, was exactly the point. Then the courtroom doors opened, and everything changed. No one in the room was ready for what they were about to see. The courtroom clock ticked loudly, each second stretching like a taut wire. Every person in the room, officers, spectators, journalists, even the clerks, felt it. Something was about to happen, but no one could yet guess what. Steven Seagal sat perfectly still, back straight, hands resting lightly on his lap. He didn't glance around. He didn't whisper to anyone. He wasn't nervous, and he wasn't afraid. If anything, his calm presence seemed to amplify the uncertainty of everyone else. The murmurs quieted as the courtroom doors opened. The judge entered, a tall figure in traditional robes, composed, authoritative. But the moment he saw Stephen, something shifted, not dramatically, just subtly. A pause, a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a small intake of breath that no one else noticed at first. Stephen's gaze lifted to meet the judge's calm, controlled, like two chess masters acknowledging each other across the board. The officers who had been smug and confident yesterday suddenly stiffened, realizing they had misjudged the situation. "Mr. Seagal," the judge said evenly, yet with a tremor that betrayed surprise, "would you like to explain why you are here today?" The room went silent. Even the gallery leaned forward instinctively. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters held their microphones tight, sensing the tension rise. Stephen stood slowly, not aggressively, not arrogantly, just with natural authority. His voice was quiet but firm. "Your Honor, I am here because I was arrested yesterday under accusations that were mistaken. I have cooperated fully, and I have remained calm because I have done nothing wrong." A faint stir went through the gallery. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected resistance, arguments, perhaps even humiliation. But not this measured confidence. The judge swallowed hard. Recognition was clear now. This was no ordinary defendant. He paused, then said, "Mr. Seagal, this case is unlike any I have seen before." The prosecutor, previously confident, cleared her throat. "Your Honor, the arrest. Well, the evidence." The judge raised a hand. "I believe Mr. Seagal's calm demeanor speaks louder than any evidence could, but the procedure yesterday was irregular." The courtroom collectively held its breath. The officers' smirks were gone. Confidence was replaced by confusion. The audience, both present and online watching live clips, sensed the complete reversal. The man who had been treated as powerless yesterday now held the moral high ground. Stephen didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. Instead, he calmly stated, "Respect and fairness are not privileges. They are rights. And it is the duty of those in power to uphold them, not misuse them." A hush fell over the room. Even those who had no idea who he was could feel the weight of the words. They weren't loud. The officers shifted uncomfortably. One whispered to the other, "We misjudged him." Stephen's calm eyes met the judge's again. There was no arrogance, only dignity, and the power in that dignity reverberated through the room. The judge, now fully aware, nodded slightly and said, "Indeed. And any further proceedings must respect proper protocol. This arrest will be reviewed immediately." The crowd murmured, some whispering in disbelief, others audibly gasping. Cameras clicked. Phones were recording every reaction. Social media notifications were already lighting up. The officers, who had thought they were in control, now seemed almost trapped in their own mistake. Stephen stepped back slightly and addressed the entire courtroom. No one should be judged by appearances, by assumptions, or by the momentary exercise of authority. True justice is patience, fairness, and humility. Every word hit with precision. The officers felt it. The gallery felt it. Even the journalists felt it. It wasn't anger. It wasn't theatrics. It was truth. And truth has a weight that no authority can ignore. At that moment, the psychological trap was complete. The officers had assumed dominance. The crowd had assumed spectacle. The prosecutor had assumed control. But all of it was overturned in quiet, undeniable dignity. Everyone was caught in the narrative, witnessing a reversal that felt both inevitable and impossible at the same time. The courtroom, moments ago tense and uncertain, had now transformed into a charged arena of whispers, stares, and flashing cameras. What had started as a seemingly routine arrest had spiraled into a spectacle of authority undone by calm, measured dignity. Steven Seagal remained calm, standing near the center of the room. Every movement, every breath was deliberate, not for show, but because he had no reason to act otherwise. The officers who had arrogantly cuffed him yesterday were now visibly tense, shuffling their feet, exchanging nervous glances. Their smug confidence had evaporated completely, replaced with unease they could not easily conceal. The judge cleared his throat, his gaze steady and commanding. "It has become clear that this arrest was handled improperly. The procedure violated standard protocols, and Mr. Seagal's rights were compromised. I am ordering an immediate review of the actions taken by law enforcement." A collective murmur ran through the courtroom. Some spectators whispered excitedly. Others gasped. Phones zoomed in, recording every word. One reporter leaned toward another and muttered, "This is insane. The officers just got exposed live." The senior officer who had originally arrested Stephen attempted to speak, perhaps to defend himself, perhaps to salvage some dignity. "Your Honor, I..." The judge lifted a hand, cutting him off without anger, but with undeniable authority. "There will be no excuses. All officers involved will be subject to review, and their conduct will be scrutinized." Mr. Seagal's composure has made one thing abundantly clear. Power must be exercised responsibly. Stephen didn't smile, didn't raise his voice, didn't gloat. He simply nodded once in acknowledgement. His quiet confidence was more powerful than any dramatic display. The courtroom seemed to collectively exhale, but there was still a sense of awe lingering in the air. Whispers spread through the gallery. Spectators recognized him not only as an actor but as someone who had handled the entire ordeal with such measured dignity that it forced everyone, from officers to bystanders, to reassess their assumptions. "Did you see him?" Not even flinching. "Yeah." And the officers are clearly freaking out. "I can't believe they arrested him in the first place." Even some of the officers present couldn't hide their embarrassment. They had been confident, sure of themselves, certain of authority. Now that certainty had crumbled, their behavior, once unquestioned, had been publicly and irreversibly exposed. Stephen's presence was calm, unshakable, and commanding. And then, as the judge gestured toward the officers, one of them, still trying to maintain composure, asked quietly, "What now?" The judge's response was simple but firm. Accountability is the first step. Restitution and reflection follow. Let this be a lesson to all in positions of authority. Humility and respect are not optional. The audience, sensing the weight of the statement, began to applaud softly. Cameras flashed, capturing every moment. Social media notifications exploded outside the courthouse. Within minutes, clips of the courtroom scene were being shared, tweeted, and uploaded across multiple platforms. Comments poured in. He didn't yell, didn't fight back, and yet completely dominated the situation. Respect, that's all he asked for, and he got it. The officers just got schooled by calm authority. Stephen took a small step forward and addressed the courtroom directly. "Power is meaningless if it is not tempered by responsibility. Today it was me. But tomorrow it could be anyone. Everyone deserves fairness, dignity, and respect." His words struck like a silent but unstoppable wave, resonating with the gallery, the officers, and the millions already watching online. At this point, the officer's embarrassment was undeniable. One tried to explain, stammering through a weak excuse about following protocol. But the courtroom had already shifted. The momentum of authority had moved away from them and landed firmly in Stephen's corner. Not because of fame, not because of theatrics, but because of undeniable calm, logic, and moral integrity. Even the prosecutor, who had entered the day confident, now looked somewhat shaken. She hadn't anticipated the sheer psychological shift of the room. Everyone was recalibrating. Every assumption made yesterday had been dismantled by quiet, strategic composure. Outside the courtroom, the story spread like wildfire. Clips showing the officers' stunned expressions, Stephen's calm demeanor, and the judge's firm statements were shared millions of times across social media platforms. Viewers around the world debated, applauded, and shared the lessons embedded in the moment. The courthouse had emptied, but the impact of the day lingered like a ripple across a still pond. Reporters filed their final notes, cameras clicked, and the video clips that had gone viral continued to spread. By now, the story wasn't just local. It was global. Millions of people were watching, sharing, and commenting online. Steven Seagal exited the courthouse with quiet dignity. He didn't wave, he didn't boast. His hands were no longer cuffed, and his posture remained upright and calm. Flashing cameras captured every step, yet he moved as if the attention was irrelevant. It wasn't attention he sought, it was justice, fairness, and a reminder that respect is not optional. Inside the courthouse, the officers who had arrested him were dealing with the fallout. Internal investigations had already begun. Some were called in to explain their behavior. Others were reprimanded for violating protocol. What had started as a minor arrest had now become a cautionary tale about arrogance, authority, and accountability. Meanwhile, social media exploded. Clips of Stephen's calm demeanor, the courtroom reversal, and the judge's firm statements were trending worldwide. Tweets, comments, and posts poured in. "This is how you handle abuse of power, calm, patient, and unstoppable. Respect isn't given, it's earned, but sometimes it must be demanded with integrity." The officers just got schooled without a single raised voice. Incredible. Even those unfamiliar with Steven Seagal as a celebrity were captivated. The narrative was universal. A man arrested unjustly, standing firm under scrutiny, and turning the tables on authority without aggression. People were mentally and emotionally hooked, feeling a sense of awe, satisfaction, and moral clarity all at once. Back outside, Stephen paused for a moment, looking at the crowd that had gathered. Some waved, some clapped quietly, some simply stared, reflecting the awe of what they had witnessed. He spoke softly, yet his voice carried across the plaza. Power is meaningless without responsibility. Today it was me, but tomorrow it could be anyone. Every person deserves fairness, dignity, and respect. The statement resonated not just with those present, but with everyone watching the clips online. People felt inspired, challenged, and compelled to reflect on their own interactions with authority, their own judgments, and their own expectations of fairness. The viral nature of the event ensured that it didn't end in a courtroom. News outlets worldwide shared the story, framing it as a lesson in humility and the importance of treating others with respect. Videos racked up millions of views within hours. Hashtags like #respect matters, #power with humility, and #Seagal justice trended across multiple platforms. Even legal experts weighed in, praising Stephen's restraint and the manner in which the situation highlighted flaws in protocol and enforcement. The officers involved faced internal reviews, mandatory training, and public scrutiny, a stark contrast to the quiet, controlled power displayed by Stephen. But Stephen himself remained above the noise. He didn't gloat, didn't seek media attention beyond what was necessary. His calm demeanor, his quiet moral authority, and his steadfast commitment to dignity and fairness had already said everything that needed to be said. By nightfall, the story had become more than just a viral moment. It was a lesson, a moral reminder, and a powerful narrative about standing firm under pressure, using patience instead of anger, and letting integrity speak louder than words or force. Stephen turned slightly toward the crowd, then addressed everyone watching online. If you believe no one should be judged by appearances, type respect in the comments. Share this story. And remember, integrity and dignity will always outlast arrogance and misuse of power. The crowd cheered softly, phones recorded. Notifications buzzed across the world. Viewers, now emotionally invested, had completed the psychological journey, from curiosity to suspense, to shock, to moral satisfaction. They had been mentally and emotionally engaged at every stage, leaving them ready to like, comment, and share. The viral story of the arrest, the courtroom reversal, and Steven Seagal's calm authority was now complete. The officers had learned their lesson. The public had witnessed the power of patience and dignity, and the narrative itself had become a template for viral, emotionally gripping storytelling, suspense, injustice, calm resistance, revelation, and moral payoff, all wrapped in one unforgettable story.